focus on the tenable part of it, how it could help us. Before I get into details, a few words on the Air France KLM group. This group, as of today, is composed of 3 airlines, so Air France, KLM, and Transavia. So this presentation will really be focused on Air France and KLM because Transavia has an IT department that is totally separated from ours. For context now, there are 3 major job descriptions in Air France KLM. So people working for the passenger side, of course, you know it, the freight part of the work, and then the one you might not know, the maintenance of planes for other airlines. We do this for many airlines, and this has an impact on IT. Why? Because these are very different jobs that will be linked to different way of managing it at the IT level. Now, let's focus to the IT side of things, and I will give you a few figures. First of all, we have 80,000 mobile devices in the world that we manage. Half of them are Android or iOS tablets, and half of them are desktop. We also have to get access to locations that are quite remote, so this has an impact on the infrastructure. We have to take into account the difficulty of connection, of course, for these remote locations. Now, let's focus a bit more on what's interesting today. So the Active Directory. What's an Active Directory first? For Air France and KLM, we have several of them. Historically, this was implemented 20 years ago in France and KLM. We were not a group at the time, and one of the first projects we had at the time during the merging was to create and merge these 2 active directories. So we had the one from Air France and the one from KLM, and we trusted both AD and decided how we approved the connection between the machines and both Active Directory. And then we realized that we needed to aggregate the data, the information we had. And we had 2 solutions to do so. First, we could migrate one of the AD to the other one, or to migrate to a new AD in itself. So the first one was quicker, of course, but this would mean that one of the company would be integrated in the other's company AD, which was a bit politically incorrect. And there was also the history part of it that was not very relevant. So we decided to implement a new Active Directory, so the common Active Directory for AF and KLM. And this is also an entrance point for Azure. So we know the users and workstations in this AD, but the ones from Air France are still in the Active Directory for Air France, while the KLM ones are in the new AD. It was very complex to do so because this is not very interesting for people. When you explain to people that you have to stop the services to manage the Active Directory, this is not something they accept well. So we had to do that under certain constraints. So we were able to decommission this KLM AD a year ago, more or less. What's also important to mention is that we are going to use more and more services in Asia AD. So do we do the total migration of Air France to the new common Active Directory, or do we migrate directly to Asia AD? We might be in between. This is still an ongoing discussion, but as of today, we cannot really get rid of the AD we have at the moment, at least not in the near future. So we had to make it more secure. Maybe 2 other points on this topic. Decommissioning the KLM AD might not seem a very big project, but often you see that you're at 85% of realization of the project, and the 15% left, you never end up doing them. So it was a real success to really decommission this AD, to simplify the processes. And we are talking about security. Of course, it's easier to deal with only 2 ADs than 3. We had other ADs also, and you can see them on the PowerPoint presentation. So you have, for example, the AD that is targeting the AD forest for the fleet of planes. So you need a specific AD forest. They are not major in terms of volume, but when you are trying to implement a security plan, you have to think about them too. Once we've decided to keep the AD and to make it secure, we had to explain to management why we wanted to make it more secure. And so this is something we've presented, this slide, we've presented it to the managing board to explain why the Active Directory was to be secure. This is nothing new, nothing invented. This comes from other partners too. And the first reaction was, are you managing it well? Or is it the reason why we need to secure it? We had to explain that it was not the case, that of course we were managing the AD correctly, but that there were other reasons, because the Active Directory gives you access to different resources, configurations. And so if someone gets access to this Active Directory, this person can get access to many sensitive data. So to explain how important it is, it's easy. You can explain that if someone can get higher privilege in the AD, this person gets access to the SharePoint, to the emails of the IT department. This is something that is very well understood and that can put fear into the management. Someone with high privilege can access everything. Second item, I don't know if in this room we have some of you, but many big companies have an Active Directory. So for an attacker, it's interesting to invest on methods that allows them to attack these Active Directories specifically. So this is a good investment for cyber attackers. And yesterday Microsoft explained this, and this is my second point. The AD was designed 20 years ago in a context of security that was quite different from the one we know today. It was not thought out to be robust in security terms. It was just about centralizing administration and reducing the time needed for management and to be more efficient. Last point now. At our company, we have 100 of operation, everyday modification, displacement of information. So for each execution, if we do not follow the guidelines, we could create new entry points for the attackers. So it's very important to know what's happening in your AD, to know the processes. And Maxime will come back on that. And Tenable was able to help us on this matter. Once we've explained that, the question is, what do we do now? So to answer this question, we based our reflection on several feedbacks, consulting we had. The first one was the cyber context we had. So we've realized that we had to develop something with the crisis in Ukraine. We can see that this is a worldwide issue. So we base also our work on the recommendation of our partners, such as Microsoft. So this is the context. Then you have the red teams. So these are people that hacked us and told us what we had to improve. Now, furthermore, and beyond the pieces of advice and so on, to really raise awareness towards the top management, it was interesting to show them that an external partner was able to enter our system and show that there were vulnerabilities. Then we had also the internal audits. We have a team dedicated to that. So they assess our processes, and they told us, and this is just an example for account management. When we have a new user, it's a new account creation, a new desktop. But once someone is leaving the company, we do not have the pressure to delete their account. So they can keep their account and there are rights that are still there. So this leads to attacks vulnerabilities. So this led also, these audits led to new recommendations. And we have also many new projects that are leading us to the cloud. And in this specific case, it's Azure AD. We haven't invented anything here. We just want to use the Anchor autopilot system to manage our desktops, and this transformation is going to the cloud for our apps. So these two projects really are based on a roadmap that requires us to activate new features in Azure AD, which means that we had to base our action plan on these targets. So that security for our Active Directory was based on this roadmap for Cloud AD. And Maxime will be explaining the different steps now. Good morning, everybody. I'm Maxime. As Erwan told us, this project was separated in two axes. The first one was on Azure AD, because we have IT teams working all on this tool, so on Azure. But for these teams, we have to propose projects that ensure that it keeps compliant and in a good shape. So this transformation program was based on ITM, but also governance, because you need a good team. You need to know who's responsible for what and who's proprietary of each roles and services. So the second phase was, well, rather our second axis was about simplifying the architecture, because Air France, as one told us, has servers all over the world in airports and other locations. It was great in the past because we had less machines, but now with the number of machines we have, it increases the ability to attack us. So we thought several years ago that we have better networks, we have solutions, so couldn't we decrease the number of controllers? That's what we did for certain case scenarios. This is about 100 controllers as of today for the controllers domains. So this allows us to decrease the attack surface, but also it's easier for management, because if there's fewer servers, there's less maintenance to do, and also less intervention from our partners on equipment and our hardware. So having fewer domains allows us to also open entries for Azure and decreases the entry point to the servers. So fewer people that can access this, fewer entry point. That's easy. I can draw this parallel, of course. You've all heard about tiering approach. So we are not inventing the wheel here. We just base our work on recommendation and approved methods. So the tiering methods allowed us to decrease the surface for attacks, cyber attacks, I mean, and also increase the trust and improve our right system, because the ID is a living body nearly. Some roles are in place, and can we trust them? This is a question we have to ask. So this was the longest part of it, and this was on the AD part of things. Now about tiering. So these slides, of course, you've all seen it. All that's done in AD is about rights and permissions. And one person has to be able to do their actions with the level of rights they have, the role they have. Not less, not more. So for example, a workstation admin needs a tier 2 level account to be able to connect to the desktop and do the maintenance for the users, their daily work. But this person cannot connect to servers. Servers are tier 1 level users. So in a company, this is someone from IT, or it could be someone from the business side of things that need to have access to the apps or to the data in the servers. So this account, of course, should not have access to the workstations, and vice versa, should not have access to tier 0 access, which mean domain administrators. Why is that now? You all understand that if we do that, there's a reason behind it. If someone from tier 0 can connect to a workstation, some credential will be left in the cache memory. So if someone gets control of this workstation, this is an issue. And I think that now I can give the floor to Sylvain for this topic. Yes, indeed, quite quickly. Just on a technical summary of this. Why is this steering model so important? So this is an explanation, but I will not go into detail. You do not authenticate in Active Directory with a password. You use a password hash. So there's an exchange between the Active Directory and yourself, but your password is hashed, and this is put into the cache memory. If an admin, a domain admin is authenticated in a workstation, we can recuperate the hash to then put it back in the Active Directory. What does it mean? It means that you have to do this steering, and this is proposed by Microsoft, but it could be applied to other systems, because you are not identified by a password, but by a hashed password. So it's very important to remember that you have to implement the tiering proposed by Microsoft. So this project for hardening our system started on the impression we had that we had two different kind of accounts, so the standard accounts that had access to the Office suite and also the apps, and we had the admin accounts, people that had the possibility to do different actions on different levels, so accessing workstation or managing AD or connecting to servers. So many actions were allowed to the admin account, indeed. With this tiering system, it is no longer possible. As Sylvain said, this was not a good situation for security, and we wanted to have something more robust, more secure. And so the first step was to identify our needs. This is what you can see on the bottom of the screen on the left side. So first, how do you apply this to your own situation, your own infrastructure? So you need to do this work to understand who does what teams are working on what actions. So you have to identify the needs first. Once it's done, you have to transpose that to the AD permission system. Once it's done, you create a delegation and implement it in the Active Directory. Let's be honest, it can take days to have a fine-tuned system. And we will also create accounts. So you can see the accounts on the right side of your screen. So this might be a bit of a repetition to what I've just said. We have the workstation account, the tier 2 account that can give you grant you permission to work on the workstation, and will be only granted for this type of action. You have also the privileged account, and you can have several different accounts for that, and this depends on your infrastructure. The business team might need to have access to certain applications and might need a privileged account. So you have to to create these accounts. So this would be a tier 1 account, and of course this would be with only the granted access to the needs they have. And then there are the high privilege accounts that gives you the possibility to access and modify the AD with also different limitations and restrictions. As for the hardening project, I think we've described this in 4 steps, but this was my opinion. This is my opinion, but I think it is a good representation of the situation. So you always have to know where you start from to be able to see the evolution, know the current status, know that there's some work to be done. So you have first to start with the status, and this is something you do with open access tools with your internal teams, but you can also ask external partners, because this could add to the discussion with the management. Once the status is done, we analyze it, we identify the different topics, and this is quite easy to implement, and can allow us to really make it more secure. This is what we call quick wins, actions that are very quickly done. So we had to define then the action plan. This is something you do with the business teams, purchase teams, procurement teams, sorry, because some hardware might have to be bought. So you define the action plan and you implement it. This is our roadmap. And then we were quite happy listening to the Microsoft conference yesterday, because we've understood that we had a lot of work for a few years still. But we should start integrating all these solutions right now, because 10 years from now it will be too late. So I told you about these quick wins. These are actions that you can do in the AD in a few minutes, few hours, maybe a few days. This might not represent a lot of work or in time, but this creates more security. Your system is more healthy. And so you should not forget about these quick actions. They are very important. This could be just about bad configuration, bad setup, and that you should get rid of. And now the last step, maybe the one that takes more time, this is the implementation part of the hardening system for all the infrastructure. This takes a lot of time. You have to review the architecture. We deleted many controlling domains. This is quick to do, of course, but you have to update all the processes, all the documentation, and this takes a lot of time. And finally, this arrow at the bottom of your screen, because once you've finished, you haven't finished. You have to start back. This is something that will never end. You always have to audit your work, look back at what you've done, and start back from the get-go. So, a few examples of what was done. If you look at the quick wins, these are easy actions that can give you a lot of results. You could just think about what can be done quite quickly. For example, do we need all our admin accounts? This might seem silly, but you might have 100, 1,000 admin accounts. Are these people still in the company? Do they need their account all the time? Are they providers? Then we could just have a temporary access to these accounts, because they might not need this admin account for the entirety of their lives. If they change department, for example, this is one thing. And then, as per Microsoft's recommendation for the high privilege admin account, couldn't we just give them workstations that are dedicated to these actions, specifically in the AD, with a specific connection to the network? This could be very good. It takes time, of course, but this is possible to do quickly.
There are many other quick wins. Voluntarily, we did not put them on the screen, but I think you know them. There are many tools, or you can find many on the internet. But we put on the screen what we believed was the most relevant to set up. Let's now focus on monitoring and the backup. For 2 days, we've heard a lot about backup, backup. Of course, I'm not going to reinvent anything. Offline is the most important. We need to have it in a safe place, and it's better to have a backup on an external Terra server than an online server that's connected to the network. Once again, we need to have a good management of things here. Then there is monitoring. It's good to have that monitoring. It can be set up with different tools. You can have it very simply with Windows, FN Forwarder, and CM solutions to create alerts. That's something that we have implemented. And when I say we, it's a teamwork. We're not just the AD team, but you have security, a network all together to improve things. And it can have a very big impact, especially in case of a crisis. The precious minutes are really crucial. Then let's turn to architecture. The simpler, the better. And we start from very far, we have to say so, but we'll try to tend towards that because, be it a small company or a big one, it simplifies management, costs, licenses. It's always good. In our case, as Erwan has said at the beginning, we have decommissioned forests, domains that were not used because it's useless. These are surfaces of attack. They have to be managed and hashed. It takes time. And time is what is mostly missing at the time being. And then there is also the integration of security in the roadmaps. We have business teams. They have apps that operate for planes, for carriages. They want the app to be operational, whatever the security, so that it's up to us, the global IT, and us, or teams altogether. We're there to say maybe security should not be at the top of priorities, but it has to be taken into account at a very high level. To do it all, of course, we've talked a lot about tools. We have also used tools that we had available at the start. And then we had a look at what was happening elsewhere. We had needs. The first need that we had was that alerts or actions in AD had to be visible in real time. We didn't want to launch tools all the time. And these tools have to give us the indicators on what happens well, that can be interesting, but especially on what is deviant, and that's a real asset. That's what we needed, really, to know where we put our striking force, I was nearly saying, but let's say our action. The tool has to be agentless. We did not want to have an XA or an SI to communicate. That was not our aim. Then our need was to have something multi-forest, as Erwan has said at the beginning of the presentation. We have several forests, and we did not want to roll out our tool on 50 forests. And also the life cycle of the app had to be simple. We all have many apps. Same thing for us. Installing them goes fast, and we're happy then. Using them, well, we use them a little bit. And then after some time, we say, okay, we have to update them because there is a fault. And that takes time, and it's always there when you don't need it. It can be complicated, so that we wanted something really simple. So we had a look around, and we selected a TENABLE ID, formerly ALCID solution. And the prerequisites for setting up the solution, of course, these are all prerequisites. It is to integrate all teams in the change. The aim being to roll out the tool simply, fast, and in the best conditions. Then we had to dedicate resources for the implementation. And that means allocated time. I'm not saying that we're all overloaded, but time is often what's missing. So we needed something simple to implement. Then there is sharing knowledge as another prerequisite. Of course, that's always interesting. You need different teams involved, be that internally or with your partner in order to share expertise and experience. And once again, I've put it, it takes time. Once it is set up, and that's where we can compare advantages and challenges. Once again, what I have put here on the screen is linked to our infrastructure. Let me start with the advantages. The configuration of Tenable, which allows us to report on all deviances on an Active Directory, is good because it allows us to set it all up. We have the Tenable indicators made suitable for audits. That was a real advantage. It tracks down malicious actions within the AD, namely. That's another interesting aspect. And as I was telling you, we have nothing to do around the app. We receive an email and it goes very well. So that's one pain point less. And we save time. Also, we can visualize the indicators with the levels of priority. I prefer working on a high priority indeed than on a low priority. That's clear. Everybody can understand that. Then we can also have a reporting in real time. When we have corrected many quick wins, because when we correct them, we see them immediately, we don't have to wait, and to validate the change and show to the top management the result, because that was also important. So let's now turn to challenges. So I'm not talking here about really blocking points, but things that were complicated for us and our infrastructure. One is big, that was the difficulty of implementation. With our system, with our infrastructure all over the world, we have many indicators who need to be tuned. And that takes time once again. So to have a reliable solution, we need to set it up, to do the configuration. And then we had difficulties with the charge, with the load, because we can think, okay, let's just roll out the tool. But in real life, once again, it is time consuming. You need to put priorities, and your priority today might not be the priority of tomorrow. And maybe something that can sound stupid, but all the changes of the gaps, the discrepancies, can have an impact. We create changes, we apply changes, and some can have a major impact on production. We're told about pre-Windows 2000 that date back from a few years ago. The group has to be empty, but if we empty a little bit too fast without the delegations elsewhere, we can be called during the weekend because there are difficulties somewhere in the world, and you need to take that into account. Silva, up to you. Indeed, to finish, and just before concluding with Erwan and Maxime, if you don't know the solution, Tenable in 3 slides, tenable.ad, it's a tool that allows you to implement a security plan on an Active Directory. You have here a few examples. That's what we call the IOAs, because in the tool you have the prevention, presented by Maxime. Then there is a module of attack detection that is obviously linked to the Active Directory. And this is one of the components of the solution. What's new? If you know the product a little bit, we have recently implemented a complete traceability module. And that's intended for organizations that have specific needs in terms of audit, LPM, or specific things for companies that work in environments that are regularly audited. So now you have the list of all changes or consultations that happen through the solution towards Active Directory that is implemented. Other new things. We've talked about tier model earlier on. We have a new IOE to control the implementation of the tier model. For the time being, that IOE is restricted to tier 0, tier O. Of course, it's going to develop with the application of tier 1 and 2. That's part of the new things of these last weeks. and then a new IOE on what we called the anti-ransomware configuration. Have you implemented properly the GPO in order to disable certain scripts, to configure the PowerShell, the execution of macros in Office, and so on? Last week, we had several new ransomwares that once again use a few gaps in terms of macro execution in Office. These are extremely important things that need to be implemented. As we have an analysis engine of a GPO, we can check if it has been implemented in the organization or not. And one last item, the attack path. If you know it, that's ALCID. If you know Tenable AD, we supply a list of controls, about 250 of them, that are reprogrammed in about 50 IOE. But let's say that's displayed as a list. So we wanted to also represent a graph of the attack path through Active Directory, using obviously bad configurations that you can have in your AD. That's the aim of the attack path. I'm not going to give you all details, but that way you can display the different paths, especially going from tier 1 to tier 0. And these are the paths that you need to check as a priority and correct as a priority. And the conclusion. To conclude, for my part, I'm going to restrict myself to the target, because we really need to have a well-defined target. Installing a T-ring, it would have been great if it could have been done in a few days, but it's not the case. It takes a lot of time. And also, we have our daily tasks to execute. So we have to go for it, but have some milestones and daily report to make sure that we progress and that we allocate time to setting up the T-ring, for example. So there is the challenge of sharing the time and the load between the project and your daily activity. Then you can have a schedule at the start and then realize that you have some internal systems and specificities so that the project has to be delayed because you have to eradicate or control permits on complex items. So keep that in mind. Keep that target in mind. And once you have reached your target, you can resume from the start with new audits and go back to the beginning of the loop. I'm going to conclude on the resource part. Indeed, as Maxime has said so, it's an investment, a big investment, but it's going to take time. So we need reliable resources, competent people who understand everything around the impact of their actions. Maxime has explained that a change that had been made and then we were called very early on a Saturday morning because the screens of the airport were not operational. So that was a difficulty that was hard to anticipate. But you know, as many other companies, we need to reinforce our strength on this. Then in terms of competencies and technical level, we can be supported by tools. We use Tenable AD, ARS for setting up the delegation model. So we should not underestimate the technical aspects. It's not an environment that's going to be highly sexy, but it's a specialty. And then the last thing will be around sponsorship awareness. We have involved a lot of money in that project. So we need to convince people, explain why it's necessary. We also need a strong sponsor. And the experts will tell us, you know, this is the time of the change, otherwise another project will be delayed. And if it's not compliant with the safety rules, the security rules that we have defined, we need to have the sponsorship to tell, no, sorry, but we put priority on security. The balance is very difficult to establish between security and operations. And people often challenge us People ask us if we cannot bypass that brick because it's a very important project. And if we don't have that sponsorship from the management, it's very complicated. We are not saying here that we did everything perfectly. We share with you what we have been doing. And the last thing is around communication. When we explain to an administrator who had an account that he will have to use for tomorrow, we need to explain why he has to do it, that he has to change passwords very regularly. It's important to explain the background so that the people understand. So there is an explanation, a guidance around the why, the purpose of our work. And same thing, it's very important to have the people on board with us. But you've seen that we are a big group, so there was a lot to do. Thank you. Before turning to questions and answers, I wanted to thank Erwan and Maxime. They have prepared the work, they have prepared the presentation. We really wanted to have a RETEX real life, and they've been very good. So many thanks and a round of applause. Are there questions from the audience? We still have 5 minutes. Have you got questions on the project? Let me bring the mic to you. Good morning. What was the time scale between the beginning of the project and now? It's a bit complicated to give you an answer and a precise scale because, as we've said, that's something that you always need to close the loop on. Let's say that the first iteration that allowed to have a big security gap took us 1 year, 1.5 years. Same thing with complicated backgrounds. We have 2 companies. We have customers that can be different, stakeholders that can be different. But after 1 year, 1.5 years, we had already achieved a big milestone. Other questions? Hello. You have told us that TENABLE was a cloud solution. How could you, as a customer, make sure that it was a secure solution? Because you've said that you put the keys in the cloud. First of all, there is a 100% on-prem solution and another one that is in the cloud. So that has to do with the network here. The link between Alcide, Tenable with its new name, and us turns towards an SSL tunnel. So consequently, we respected the security rules that are put on us by the security teams and the CISO. That's how it was determined at the start. Only the tenable destinations are open. In terms of architectural network, in the cloud you have 2 possibilities, either IPsec between the tenant that hosts the solution and the network, or TLS. Both architectures are possible in terms of network. So obviously it's not a REST service that is clearly exposed on the public area. If I can add something fast on the architecture, that's a debate that we often have with architects, not just on Tenable, but on other solutions, EDR, EPP, and so on. And the question is it better to have a solution in the cloud where the LCN will be managed, where we're sure that we reach a correct level of security, or an on-prem solution that we can't manage through time? And today we prefer the solution of having a cloud solution, and anyway, it's more and more the solution. And also, it's nearly a partnership. We base ourselves on the editor and we have regular exchanges. Other questions? Hello, I have two questions. Does that mean that the teams of the headquarters have as many accounts at sites that they need to get connected to? And second, why didn't you use the group protected users to prevent some attacks like a hash? For your first question, we have many accounts. So clearly, we've got a nice key pass. We have, I don't know exactly how many accounts I have. I don't know the passwords. So indeed, that's something complicated to have integrated by the workstation admins, for example, or the server admins. As Erwan has said, that has to do with communication, because it's good to have accounts and passwords. But when I tell you about communication, it means where do we put the passwords? And once again, that can be a problem because that requires a tool that will have to be validated. Is that tool all right to store all of these accounts? So, indeed, that has to be taken into account. Because we could create 10 accounts per person, but then what's at the background? The tool perspective is important. So, indeed, we have many accounts, and I can't even tell you how many I have. And these accounts are well split according to the domains. And then your second question, protected users. That's part of the quick wins that we haven't taken over here because these are best practices. The protected user is indeed implemented on high privilege groups, for example, tier O, and then the implementation on tier 2 accounts and tier 1 can take place. But of course, it's done for tier O. Just to react on the protected user, that's a group in AD. To make things clear, when you include accounts there, the way the account will be authenticated, the way the protocols will be used, will be safer, more secure, be then Carbaro or TLM. To make it simple, I think we need to implement it for TO, but the use of that group has plenty of board effects that are not easy to manage in terms of production. An example, when you include an account in protected user, there is no longer any cache on the device. So it's online. The controller domain has to be there. You cannot proceed when you take the train and authenticate on your AD because there is a local account of your hash. For TO, there is not much zero, but for the other privileged accounts, it's not always feasible to use protected user. Thank you. Okay, we have one other question there. Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. I have a question. I'd like to come back on your reflection that started at the beginning of the project around the migration. Are they on-premise towards Azure AD? What are your obstacles in terms of security to go towards a full Azure AD and to say bye-bye to the other system? I have a question on GPO, but I'd like to have your reflection. So I'm going to give a perspective that will probably be completed by my colleagues. But I believe that I receive a question every month from my director to ask me why I still have an AD on-prem. Because you have the file servers, for example, that is complicated in Azure AD. Then I don't know if you've seen on the slides, but we have 2,000 apps. We're not going to transfer all them in one go into Azure AD. These are reflections, projects that have started and typically transferred to modern workplace. Maybe the workplace is not the most complicated part, but only that means a few months and a few years. So that was our reflection to say, what's our target? We nearly all agree that the target will eventually be Azure AD, but today we find it difficult to know if it will be in 5, 10, 15 years' time. The reflection was, okay, we know that we'll go for it, but not tomorrow. So we need to do something on AD on-prem. So progressively, when we'll be able to transfer our services into Azure AD, we'll do it, but we'll take our time, even if we put some pressure on it. But we'll do it in an organized way. Okay, so that's a reflection that feeds in the projects. And to complete the answer, indeed, these are usual questions. And I did a presentation on the topic. If you visit the website of EIC, that's an event in Germany organized by Kupiner Call, I did a presentation on that topic precisely. I've worked on it quite a lot. What we can say is, first, if you are a big company, big organization, let's say 40,000 computers, the time scale to remove AD is 15, 17 years. If you start now, some things look simple, they are not. We don't have the time to debate, but you can visit our stand. But that's the time scale, 15, 17 years. So obviously, the second major item during these years, we still need to look after AD. It's not because your target is in 15 years to remove something that you're not going to maintain it. And you still maintain your car, even if you change car in 10 years' time. So these are only additional layers. It's difficult to remove some, as everyone has said. And indeed, it's a major topic. And then we had another question, if you can be handed the mic.
Merci.
Merci, bonjour.
Thank you. So I had a question on the choice you made for TENABLE. Were there any other solution possible? Did you do a benchmark work? Just simply, we used the internal tools that were available, and we had many tools that we were still using. We were already using, script that we had in house. To us, the only one that was able to answer our needs was Alcid at the time, so TENABLE AD. But now you can find on others, and you can see this in the exhibition of today. So this has been more than 3 or 4 years, I think, and at the time this was the best one, I would say. Thank you very much. We have to conclude and leave the room. So if you have any questions, please do come to us. We are at your